points that previous speakers have made. I think, following on from what Jonathan said, I think if a novelist had tried to write a novel and he just talked about or seemed to create what's actually going on in Gaza at the moment, I think the editor would return it and say that's just over the top. Nobody will ever believe that. How can you write about a doctor having to amputate the limbs of his own children without anaesthetic? That image is with me until my dying day. And there's so many hundreds more similar images. Jonathan alluded to a few of them. But I would say that there is real hope, because Jonathan alluded to a campaign now from a grassroots doctors to drive Israel out of a particular international medical association. And I remember a few years ago, Jonathan, there was a similar thing to get Israel kicked out of the International Medical Association because of their complicity in torture. They patch up people to get back in to get tortured. And I remember you got 700 signatures, but I was really pissed off with a couple of doctor friends because I said, what are you doing? What are you doing? Doctors are speaking to doctors. I've got 6 doctors in my practice. Everybody here has got probably a number of doctors that they can approach, and we could have multiplied the numbers, the effectiveness of that campaign, if we had just all stood together and united in order to be effective. I think, first of all, a little bit of humour, because he touched on anti-Semitism. Good news, before we talk about some of the horror, but good news is that even 20 years ago, an opinion poll was conducted across all of the EU, 2003. And some junior put Israel into the opinion poll by mistake. So people across Europe were asked, what's your opinion of Italy, North Korea, France, Italy came top of the poll as the greatest threat to world peace. And Franco Frattini, the EU Foreign Affairs spokesman, was 59%. I went to Palestine about 2 months later and mentioned this to Palestinians, 59%. And said, we know about the 59%, but what's happening? There's not enough happening on the ground. It became very, very well known. But Franco Frattini apologised to Israel for the opinions of Europeans. And he said he assured Israel those opinions would not be allowed to influence EU policy towards Israel. And he really, I can't remember the exact words he used, but it was a frightening memory of what had happened before. Basically accused all Europeans in the majority of being anti-Semitic. So we've been here before. It's just part of the rain that falls on you when you raise the issue of Palestine. But I mean, I'm not going to talk about me at all, but except for one thing. I was up on trial with 4 comrades for anti-Semitism. And for two years we said, what the hell did you say? What is the basis of this racially aggravated crime? And after 2 years we go to court, and the prosecutor stands up and he says in open court, this was reported in the national press, and the UCU used it in their excellent victory against Azio, who called them anti-Semitic. It is anti-Semitic to say the words, end the siege of Gaza. I kid you not, 2 years, a bit of silver, and it was kicked out. It gets really crazy. And I remember that day going out onto the street, and there were a lot of reporters there. We don't often get reporters. And there was a woman there I recognised immediately from the Jewish Chronicle. I thought, I'm going to have some fun with her. Because if you open your mouth and buy a half a dozen eggs, she says that's anti-Semitic in some way that you can never fathom yourself. Is it the half dozen? Is it the eggs? What's anti-Semitic about it? And I said, look, this is getting crazy. And you mentioned Jonathan Hoffman, who we had a meeting with Omar Barghouti and Ronnie Casrolls in Edinburgh. And then the following day we went to the LSE, and this idiot jumps up and shouts and balls and interjects with nonsense. And the following day, the BBC website for 24 hours carried a story that this man was the victim of an anti-Semitic diatribe. And do you know what it was? Do you really believe that? Somebody said to him. Do you? Get it? It goes together. He elided the 2 words, do you? And the BBC, now it was all recorded, so they had to take it down after a while. But anyway, I said, look, this is getting ridiculous. Some people in this city are now afraid to ask anybody if there's a bus due. I was certainly afraid to say I went away camping and I woke up with a heavy dew on top of me. And I hoped she would say this is anti, but she didn't. She put a pen away. She didn't do it. Look, it's insane, isn't it? I want to pay tribute today to Bob Fulton, who died a few days ago. Brilliant trade unionist. Bob was one of the Rolls-Royce East Kilbride workers who basically grounded the dictatorship's Air Force, or at least half of the Air Force, because the engines were sent to East Kilbride Rolls-Royce for maintenance. And Bob went into work one day and he went to the manager's office and said, I can't work on these engines. I'm a Christian. He was a Christian, I'm not. He said, I just can't do it. And then he waited to get fired. But while he spoke to the shop stewards committee, they backed him 100%. They went to a meeting of the factory workforce and they backed him 100%. And those engines lay in the yard rusting for years before they mysteriously disappeared later. This is a platinum standard for training. If we can aspire to it, you can't turn that tap on and off because it's a very different situation today. But that's what we can aim for. That has been possible in the past. I spoke a few days ago, and we're going to organise an event with Mary Manning. You don't know her name? You should get it tattooed on your arm. Mary Manning led a strike in Dublin of Dunn's workers for 2 years. She's still hale and hearted, and she's coming over to do a meeting, which I spoke. Name dropping, right? I know Lisa Winstanley. I know too. I was talking to Mandela's grandson a few days ago. As one does. He's coming over to do a gig in Brighton as well. And he made the point that strike was felt in South Africa. Yeah. Even inside the prisons, it was felt. People who were doing 20 years. Yeah. What are these women doing on strike for 2 years in Ireland? And they were getting hammered militarily, but then the strike pops up. And even the screws in the prison began to think, we thought we were winning, but what's this happening in Ireland? It's morale. Morale in a struggle for existence is absolutely critical. It's not the people who can do all the killing, that's Israel by a long shot, who win. It was 60-1 killed in Algeria before the French were kicked out. Like 1.5 million Algerians and I think 1/60th of that of French. And in Indochina, 3 million Indochinese were killed, and we all know about the 50,000 Americans. Again, 60-1. Israel's kind of in the same ballpark at the moment. But it's not the people that do the massive killing who win in the end of the day. That wasn't the case in many, many colonial situations. It's those who can endure that terrible punishment and still continue to struggle. And that's the Palestinians by any yardstick. So there's grounds for optimism, not just in terms of the EU having to suppress the opinions of their own citizens, not just Asa Winstanley having to have his meetings banned and the criminal justice system used against people. There's one guy, Dr. Muir Houston at Glasgow University. He posted a cartoon on the departmental notice board by a really nice Palestinian cartoonist. I phoned up and spoke to his daughter, who speaks great English. 2 years after it went up, they got a complaint that it was anti-Semitic. It was bullshit. I mean, it was a big camera looking at a wee Israeli kid who'd hurt a finger, and there's Palestinian kids' body parts all over the place, and they're just ignoring it. He was disciplined, was taken to a tribunal, and he was allowed to defend himself. But academic experts insisted the cartoon was anti-Semitic, but they could not be identified. They couldn't be identified. I've got the emails. He was disciplined, sanctioned by people behind a screen. I say he's a nasty whatever it is, right? And he sues me, and I've got world experts who can say that he is a nasty whatever it is, but we're not telling you who they are. I mean, this is ridiculous, isn't it? This is really surreal. Yeah. So that's the age we live in. This is what's happening. The people who stand up against genocide are the ones who are on the defensive, but we will go on the offensive as well. Okay, what's the big thing today for me? And I think even liberal pundits in Italia now talking about World War III as a real possibility coming down the road. You can see the things clicking into place. But a guy called Ghassan Abu Sitta just got elected rector of Glasgow University. He's a nephew of the great Salman Abu Sitta, the cartographer. And Ghassan, by the way, he got 80% of the vote from the students. It tells you there's a lot of support for this. But he says, don't talk about Israeli genocide, talk about the axis of genocide. Israel, Britain, and Washington. We're not just facilitating it, we're involved in it, we're making sure it happens. But the leader of the left-wing opposition can say Israel has a right to deny water to the people of Gaza. We know this is genocidal talk. If I say, look, you should deny water to the people of Brighton, that means we're going to kill you. That's where we are. Dark, dark, dark times. And in the past, I've always argued with people against comparing Israel to the Nazis. I think I always thought it showed a lack of understanding of the horrors of British colonialism. Compare it to Kenya, compare it to Bengal, 3 million dead, compare it to here and there. But I think that's wrong. I think now we should. The IHRA, is Brighton adopted it?
Yeah.
Has Brighton adopted IHRA?
Yeah.
IHRA, let's commit an illegal act. It's not legal, but the IHRA forbids comparison of Israel's behaviour to that of the Nazis. I don't see how you can avoid it. I don't think even the Nazis would have had senior figures publicly demonstrating in support of the rape of Jewish detainees. They might do it, but they wouldn't have the temerity to do it publicly and openly. That's what we've got in Israel today. So I think it's very dangerous. If I were an ISIS recruiter, if I was recruiting for ISIS or Al-Qaeda, I'd wake up every morning with a smile on my face. Because Britain is teaching the whole world, expect no mercy. Look at Gaza, that's what you can get if you stand up to the empire. And that is just the best possible conditions for that kind of recruitment. So I think when we have to build a powerful and militant solidarity campaign, we have to realise that if we don't do it, something horrible is going to happen to us as well. I was involved in a campaign against the war in Vietnam. The Americans B-52'd the country, poisoned the whole soil. They did every war crime you can imagine. In fact, I became a socialist and active when I realised and I learned that America was producing little tiny plastic bomblets, brightly coloured, and dropping them all over the land surface of the country, designed for children to pick up and lose a limb. But they didn't want to kill them, they wanted to overwhelm the basic health service of the country. So I think that situation that we're in is really, but the Vietnamese never tried to blow up anything in America. Why would they? The American anti-war movement was powerful, was strong. The American government had to kill students to try and suppress that movement. Soldiers were shooting their officers. There was a massive, and the Vietnamese could see there was an anti-war movement, and that inhibited any tendency towards despair, and despair leads to terrorism, of course. We have to build a similar anti-genocide movement, pro-Palestine Solidarity movement, not timid, not hiding, not trying to be respectable so that politicians will kiss us and allow us to meet with them every now and again. We have to build something that's visible from the Middle East to undercut the ISIS recruiters, as well as, of course, to give solace and to help the Palestinians struggle where they are. What's remarkable for me, and I think trade unions really need to think about this, is the total nature of the response to the genocide. Not just the politicians in Westminster and in Edinburgh, but the Football Association. Free tickets for Ukrainian refugees, queue up, there's your tickets, Palestinians, you can get nothing for you. And also, it's everywhere, it's really everywhere. In schools, we're getting stories of children going to school and saying, teacher, we painted nice Ukrainian flags and we empathise with the Ukrainian children, and that's fine. But you know, there's children who look a little bit like me in Gaza, and they've written poetry, and they've just been killed. Could we do something with the poetry? Silence. Now I consider that it's happening up and down the country. I think that's child abuse. If you have two children and you say, look, I want you to empathise and show your humanity in one situation and turn it off in another one, I think that's abuse. And I want you to know why the teachers' unions are not raising this actively, publicly, on the ground level and in their unions to say this is unacceptable. And by the way, Palestine's not a horrible, horrible thing happening. I know it's the edge of the Mediterranean, it's not so far away, but it's not a small country far away. We're paying the price here. And what do you do with a generation of children when you tell them, when you see something truly horrible happening, be quiet about it. Don't tell anybody. Not to stretch a point, I think the ghost of Jimmy Savile would be smiling at that. That's a terrible price that we have to pay. Look, Dunn Stores was a great example of the effect on morale in South Africa. Since 2014, the biggest port on the US Pacific, Auckland, has refused to unload any Israeli ship that comes in. They tried again in 2021 during that massacre. And what happened was, I think, a model for all of us. I remember Mike Lynch was the most popular trade unionist in the country. If you had Mick Lynch, when the train drivers were involved in the struggle. And he banged on quite a bit on the telly about the need for trade unions to organise in the community. It was really important when he said that. It really touched a chord because there's such a political vacuum. The political organisations you'd be expecting to organise in the community aren't doing it. And he really made that point strongly. But what happened? What happened in 2021 in Auckland? The Israeli ship came in. 1,000 people from the community picketed the port from 6 in the morning till 2 p.m. And the longshoremen refused to cross the picket line. Another 1,000 people picketed the port from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. And again, the longshoremen refused to cross the picket line. And the ship had to leave the port. It went up to Vancouver where the Canadian cops beat the hell out of a lot of people and it successfully unloaded. But isn't that a fantastic example? Is that not something, at least to aspire? We can't achieve that short. You need really strong organisation. And the longshoremen, and just tell me to shut up. No, I'll shut up. The longshoremen I'm chronologically challenged, as well as follically challenged. The longshoremen there cut their teeth in the struggle against apartheid in South Africa by doing similar stuff. Civil rights movement, they were schooled in that system, and they've transferred it entirely into the support for the Palestinians. Now, there were a few years ago, I know the same thing happens in Durban port in South Africa. The last I knew, they couldn't unload any Israeli ships there. But there were also solidarity strikes in Scandinavia. They were only for a week at a time sometimes, and in India and in Australia. There's the potential to bring Israel to its knees, right? So I think the scabbing of the leaders of Unite, the scabbing by the leaders of other trade unions, because Palestinians have put up a picket line. It's called the BDS movement, and we don't want you to cross. The Unite leaders and other trade union leaders sadly are crossing. I'll finish by saying this. I was in court last week, got fined 800 quid. And we could have got the money in half an hour, but we asked 800 people to give us £1 each. And top it up while you're at it, make it 25 or 50 or 100. And we got 800 donations, right? Because we wanted to do that to the sheriff. We wanted to repeat what the Green Brigade had done in Celtic Park in Glasgow. When Celtic was fined, many times they were fined 20,000 quid for flying Palestinian flags, the Green Brigade said, we'll raise a multiple of that sum and we'll send it to Laji camp, we'll send it to Palestinians for football and so on. And it really humiliated I think it was FIFA. Must have been FIFA. Humiliated FIFA. We wanted to humiliate the sheriff. We wanted to have an act of defiance. And obviously, 800 quid is trivial compared to the 5 Palestine Action people the following day in the same building who got 12 months and 14 months for trying to interdict the supply of weapons from the Thales factory just down the road from the courtroom. And anything we raise will be made available. There's a whole number of trials in that building. People who've disturbed athletics, people who've disturbed other things, and above all, people who've disturbed arms companies. So we want to build a campaign in their support. I think that's all I've got to say. I think there's room for great despair. A lot of people are traumatised. A lot of people look at this. How can you defend yourself? 10 months? And when we were outside Barclays or out in the streets yesterday, my conscience of our horse, we are protesting against genocide. Wait a minute. And the government is supporting it month after bloody month. And it becomes ever more degenerate. Ever more degenerate. What's more degenerate than serious politicians campaigning to rape prisoners? I could not have imagined that 10 months ago. Very few people could. It's a pit of horror that's completely new to many of us. So there's that. But there's also the fact that, they don't trust ordinary people. Ordinary people, when you ask them, don't endorse that. Don't support it. There's a huge wellspring of sympathy for Palestine Solidarity activists. My final point. Sorry, I've got a terrible habit of saying this is my final point 18 times. It's like a nervous tick. The final point is that the American poet said it brilliantly. We are the people we have been waiting for. Isn't that wonderful? It ain't the Labour Party, although nobody in this room thinks that. It's nobody else. It's only us. I mean, that's easy to say, but it's actually true. But if we act together, somebody once said, if we all spit together, we can drown the bastards. It's a horrible image. I don't suggest. But getting people to spit at the same time is bloody hard, isn't it? It's a nice image, though, sometimes, if you think of Starmer. So look, friends, this is not the time for despair, right? Somebody once said, it's a luxury we can't afford, we'll save it for better days. Right? It's dark, dark times. I do see World War III coming down the road. Whether it happens sooner or later, nobody knows. But we have to fight for the Palestinians as if we were fighting for our own lives and those of our children and grandchildren, because we are. We really are.